As the weather warms up and early fruit starts to ripen, I always feel inspired to bake something up. Follow along as I share some of our favorite German desserts and sweets that will bring a touch of spring right into your kitchen. The first recipe is a German strawberry cake, and it is a little bit like strawberry shortcakes, but just the German version of it, and I have perfected the recipe over time. It is a simple sponge cake for which I am using butter and sugar and a dash of salt. And this is one of those recipes where you want to whip up the butter and the sugar to make it really fluffy, and that's typically taking a lot of time, and I use my hand blender for that, but it's one of those essential steps in the recipe that you don't want to miss. Following that, I am adding 1 egg at a time, and then again whip and beat the dough, the batter, actually really it is, for about 30 seconds after I'm adding each egg. And this is also really important to bring a lot of air into the sponge cake to make it light and airy and give it its distinct texture. Sometimes I need to scrape down the batter from the sides, and oops, there was my drawer underneath that slid out. I guess I got my cable for the hand mixer caught up in the handle of the drawer underneath. Here's my last egg going into the cake batter. It is one of those recipes that whenever I just have the first bite, it propels me right back to Germany, where I'm sitting in my family's backyard under an umbrella. It is all lush and green, and it's the first sun rays in the spring, and we're eating this strawberry cake that is so quintessential. It has a nice vanilla flavor, which usually you add with vanilla sugar, but for this video here I added vanilla extract because that is what more people in the US are able to find versus making your own vanilla sugar, for which I also have a recipe because it's super simple to make. The other important piece about this recipe is sifting the flour, which is why I am adding the flour to a separate bowl. And here I have my flour sifter. That's really an inexpensive tool, but it is so essential because, first of all, you can really get the flour very finely sifted because sometimes there are some clumps in it, but also in just a little bit I'll be adding baking powder to this flour mixture. And I don't know about your baking powder, but once I open up my jar, it tends to clump a little bit. And then you get these pockets of baking powder in your batter that will just create these holes that we don't want. And that's another reason why I like that flour sifter. And it just really is a fun thing to do. As you can see, it's coming out really fast and really quick. And if you have kids, they often really enjoy this activity too. The other important piece here about this recipe is about adding half of the flour baking powder mixture, and just on low, mix that up with the butter cream, the butter sugar mixture, adding a bit of milk, and then mixing it up again, and just really incorporating it, not really mixing it at that point. And repeating this process again. I love using my handheld mixer for that versus the KitchenAid because I feel like it gives me a little bit more control over what's happening versus having the KitchenAid that I love, and you can see in the background there in the corner of my kitchen. But for this recipe, I actually really prefer using my handheld blender. Another piece here about this recipe is using a specific cake pan, and I'm going to leave a link for you where you can find it. It's actually not very expensive, and it has a bit of a rim once you invert the sponge cake, and that's critical to keep the fruit all together. You can also use a springform pan or any other cake pan that you have, but I just love using it the traditional way, and I like to butter it, and sometimes I flour it. Even though it is a non-stick coating, it makes inverting the cake and removing it from the cake pan just so much easier. And here goes the batter into the cake pan, and then I'll spread it around with a silicone spatula to make it really even. And I don't know if you can see it in the video, but there's a little bit of a rim down there that once you invert it, like I said, is almost like a little wall to keep your fruit on the cake. Give it a good shake to make it a little bit more even still. And then I'll bake it until a inserted toothpick comes out clean, or it's golden brown on top, or ideally both. I also want to remove it from the cake pan immediately, and here's the simple way to do it. You just press your wire rack on top, and with 2 pot holders, invert it, pull the pot holders out, and simply lift the cake pan off. And here you can see the final sponge cake, which is so quintessential German that you can even buy it pre-made in stores in Germany. However, I know you and you know me, we like homemade better than store-bought. For the glaze, which is one way to add something to the top of the cake here, I am using cherry juice, tart cherry juice. You can also use any other red juice or hibiscus tea, or if you want to make a clear glaze, you can just simply use water. However, I actually like the fruity, slightly tart taste of the cherry juice for this glaze here on my strawberry cake. I'm adding a little bit of sugar because, like I said, this is an unsweetened cherry juice, tart cherry juice. You can also get sweet cherry juice if you prefer that. And in another measuring cup, I'm adding just a little bit more of that juice because I will add cornstarch, which actually makes this whole glaze very stiff and stay in place instead of running all over the place. I like to twirl my wire whisk between my hands because actually my measuring cup is almost a little small for the job here, but you know, we can always make do with what we have. I did have some of my rhubarb compote left, and I decided on the fly, which is not traditional at all, to add that to the cake here as the base underneath the strawberries. You can leave that out. You can use a pudding, you can use a lemon cream. I'm going to leave a link for the printable recipe, and it will have the recipe for the lemon cream base that you can add, and you can add both or just one. And the fun part comes cutting up the strawberries. You can either do it the way I'm doing it here, which is so typical me. I'm trying to space them evenly out, the strawberry halves here on the cake. And that's just how I am. I like to be really neat, and I like to do it that way. You can also just cut the strawberries in smaller pieces and simply pile them right on top of the cake with a mound in the middle. Let's see if we can fit the last bits of strawberries in the middle here and make it look all pretty. And once my cherry juice is boiling in the saucepan, I'm adding the slurry to it. I think that's what you call it, right? When you add cornstarch to a liquid, and whisking it, bringing it back to a boil until it starts to thicken, which actually happens really quick here. So you want to move fast. Deep, dark red, and you can either spoon it over your cake or you can simply pour it right from the saucepan, but using a spoon is going to give you a little bit more control where it goes. And I'm trying to be super neat here and covering all the strawberries. But again, you want to move fast because this glaze gets solid pretty quick. And once it's done, we love it with a dollop of whipped cream. I always love elderberries. I know where they grow, and I love elderflower syrup, which is what I'm making for this recipe here. I am adding water to mason jars. I need about 1.5 quarts, and again, I'm leaving the link for you below that you can find it, print it out, and make it at home. It is so delicious. You can use it for lemonades. You can add a little bit of sparkling water to it, and there is a very popular German summer drink called Hugo, which is some sparkling wine, some elderflower syrup, and a little bit of lemon possibly, and an ice cube, and it's super refreshing. You might be surprised how much sugar goes into this recipe, and every time I make it, I'm surprised too, but you will need it because first of all, it's going to make it last, and secondly, once you dilute it with some sparkling water or some sparkling wine, it actually won't taste all that sweet. I'm adding citric acid, another ingredient to retain the pretty color and also make it last longer. In this little bag here, I have elder flowers that I picked on my early morning walk. I found a bush and I thought, oh, this is the perfect time to make elderflower syrup. I make that every year, and once I open the bottle, it just sits in my refrigerator and it's always ready to go. Sometimes there are some bugs in it, and ultimately everything gets strained out, but I like to shake them out just a little bit, but then also cut off any leaves and thicker stems because we really only want the elder flowers. They're so pretty white and they have this delicate floral scent and taste that we're capturing in the syrup. To that I'm adding lemon, and I like to slice the lemon thinly. I'm getting the lemon juice and also the lemon essence from the lemon rind, which is a little bit like lemon zest, but a little bit different. So we're getting a lot of different fresh, floral, lemony flavors in this elderflower syrup. Adding the citric acid to my sugar water. Once it comes to a boil, you can see it's foaming quite a bit. I'm letting that happen before I pour the hot liquid right over my mason jars. And notice that I have my mason jars sitting on a wooden cutting board just to make sure they don't crack. And I should have moved them away from my upper cabinets there, but I realized that too late and I was already pouring, and so I just went with it. Put a lid on it, pretty tight. It's still hot, but you can use pot holders if you want to touch the mason jars. And then for 3 days, every day I shake the mason jars a little bit, and then I strain the syrup. For my next recipe, this is a German cheesecake, and it is very different from its American cousin, mostly in that we're not using cream cheese, but the traditional recipe uses Quark. I'm pronouncing it the German way, Quark, Q-U-A-R-K, quark, and it is not very easy to find in the US. I usually make it myself, but for this recipe, what I really wanted to try is see if I could make it with ingredients that all of you can easily find in grocery stores. And first of all, I'm gonna separate my eggs here because I do want to whip up the egg whites and keep the egg yolks separate, which is what I'm doing here. And I think I have people walking through the kitchen and talking to me. Sometimes I'm all by myself, and sometimes everybody's in the kitchen coming in and trying to do something while I'm recording this for you. Whipping up the egg whites goes pretty quick. I'm going to show you in a moment how stiff I really want those egg whites. The stiffer, the better they will hold up for the final cake. See, they don't even flow out or fall out of this what am I calling it? the bowl that I'm doing it in. I am actually adding a little bit of oil, which is the classic recipe that's been in my family for over decades. And some lemon juice. It adds a nice flavor and a little bit of freshness to the cheesecake. If you want, you can also add lemon zest. Sometimes I do that and sometimes I don't. It's delicious either way. Adding sugar, vanilla extract. Usually this is my homemade extract. I really don't want to buy it anymore. A little bit of cornstarch because the original recipe has vanilla pudding in it, and I know that can be a little bit hard to find, but essentially vanilla pudding is just vanilla, cornstarch, and sugar, and you can just make that your own. A little bit of baking powder to make it a little bit more fluffy. And then I am using Greek yogurt. I got some smaller containers here and I'll add them directly to this whole mixture. This cake's really easy because you just essentially dump all the ingredients in one big bowl and mix it up. However, I want to add one more step that I will show you in just a moment. There's always some Greek yogurt stuck to this little paper lid that's in there, and I'm so frugal, I like to make sure I scrape it off. Here I'm using cottage cheese, and if you've noticed, cottage cheese has these, even if you use small curd, it is curdly, and I wanted to blend this in my little mini blender here because quark has a very even consistency as opposed to cottage cheese, and I wanted to make sure that I get as close to the original consistency as I could with easily available ingredients that you can all find in grocery stores. It doesn't take long. You just mix it up a little bit and then I pour it into the bowl with all the other ingredients. The reason I'm combining Greek yogurt and cottage cheese is because quark has a fresher, almost fresh cheese taste and a little bit more tartness than regular cottage cheese, and Greek yogurt has more of the consistency of quark, and that's why I'm marrying, if you will, the two for this recipe. And I have to say it turned out it was a huge success. Lastly, I'll add my stiff egg whites. And at this point, I basically just want to gently mix them in. I could have also used my silicone spatula to fold them in, but I'm using my handheld blender to just gently mix them in. Since I wanted to make them as individual portions, if you will, I wanted to bake them in glass jars, and key to this method is that you take out the oven rack before you preheat your oven and place the glass jars on the cold oven rack. If you place glass jars on a hot oven rack or put them in the preheated oven, they might crack and you don't want to lose all your mason jars. And then I'm going to spoon my cheesecake batter right into there, and if you want them to last longer, which they will, you want to make sure that you clean the rim if you get any batter right on the rim. I ended up with more batter than I had little mason jars, so I added 2 more of my Weck jars, which are a lot bigger and actually a little bit better for this job because their glass is thicker and officially made for canning and using high heat temperatures, even in a hot oven. I have a little bit more, and I have another Weck jar. You can never have enough jars, and sometimes I feel like I have too many. I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at them and I'm almost embarrassed, but these are the moments when I am actually pretty happy that I have so many. This whole rack with the jars goes into the oven. And obviously, because I have so many different sizes here, they're going to bake a little bit at different times. I'll pull out the first ones, and don't be surprised if your cheesecake has risen quite a bit, but then deflates a little bit. That's quite normal and expected. If you want to make them last, you can put a lid on it while they're still hot. And ideally, you want the inner lid to be wet, then it actually seals a little bit better. And when you're ready to serve them, you can add a piece of strawberry or just eat them just like that. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.